The emergency alert on my phone screamed at 3 in the morning, warning that Hurricane Delilah was changing course and heading straight for our section of Jacksonville Beach, Florida, with expected landfall in less than 48 hours. I rolled over in bed, groaning as the reality sank in. My wife Emma had taken our kids to visit her parents in Atlanta 2 days ago, planning to stay for the week. At least they were safe. Me, I had work commitments that kept me here until tomorrow afternoon, but now I was staring down a Category 3 hurricane bearing down on our coastal neighborhood. I grabbed my laptop and started checking the latest weather models. The cone of uncertainty had narrowed, and we were dead center in the projected path. By 6 in the morning, I was at Home Depot with half the neighborhood, watching as the shelves emptied of water, batteries, and plywood. I had prepared somewhat, my generator sitting in the garage, tested and ready. I had bought that beast 3 years ago after Hurricane Marcus knocked out power for 11 days. 8,000 watts of pure backup power, enough to run my fridge, a few lights, the internet router, and most importantly, the air conditioning in this Florida heat. That generator cost me nearly $2,000, but after sweating through a week and a half of 90-degree weather with no power, it was worth every penny. I spent the morning securing everything I could, bringing in patio furniture, tying down the garbage cans, and checking my hurricane shutters. The neighborhood was in full preparation mode. People boarding up windows, loading cars with valuables, and generally looking stressed as hell. The governor had already issued a mandatory evacuation for coastal areas, but I planned to ride it out. Our house was newer, built to code, and we were just far enough from the beach to avoid the worst of the storm surge. Around noon, as I was testing the generator one more time in my driveway, I saw her marching down the sidewalk like she was leading an army. Brenda Patterson, president of the Seaside Oaks Homeowners Association. She was 52, had that severe haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager," and wore her HOA authority like a military general wore stars. She had a clipboard, naturally, because Brenda always had a clipboard. Xavier Donovan, she called out, waving that clipboard like a flag. I straightened up from the generator, wiping oil off my hands with a rag. "Hey, Brenda, getting ready for the storm." She marched right up into my driveway without invitation, her sensible shoes clicking against the concrete. "Yes, and that's exactly what I need to talk to you about. The community center needs to be set up as a shelter for those who are staying, and we need your generator." I blinked at her. "Excuse me, your generator." She pointed at it with her pen like she was identifying evidence at a crime scene. "The community center will need power during the outage. I'm coordinating resources for residents who will be sheltering there, and your generator is exactly what we need." I shook my head, still processing this. "Brenda, this is my personal generator for my house. I need it here." Her lips pressed into that thin line I had seen 100 times at HOA meetings. "Xavier, this is a community emergency. We all need to contribute." The HOA bylaws clearly state that residents must cooperate during emergencies for the good of the community. They say we should cooperate, not that we have to hand over our personal property, I countered. "Look, I'm sorry, but I need this for my house. My food, my medicine, everything depends on keeping power." Brenda's eyes narrowed. "You're being selfish. There are elderly residents who need. Then they should evacuate," I interrupted. "There's a mandatory evacuation order. The community center isn't rated as an official shelter." "Some people have nowhere to go," she snapped. "And as HOA president, I'm making an executive decision. The generator goes to the community center." I crossed my arms. "No, it doesn't. It's my property and it stays on my property." Brenda's face flushed red. She flipped through papers on her clipboard with aggressive movements. Fine. Then I'm issuing you a citation for non-compliance with emergency protocols. That's a $500 fine per day until you comply. You can't do that. I absolutely can. Section 12. Subsection 4 of the HOA governing documents. She scribbled something on her clipboard. You'll receive the formal notice within the hour. She spun on her heel and marched off, leaving me standing there equal parts angry and bewildered. I knew Brenda had a reputation for power trips, but this was insane even for her. I pulled out my phone and called my buddy Marcus, who was an attorney. He did not practice HOA law specifically, but he knew enough to give me advice. She can't actually force you to give up personal property, Marcus confirmed after I explained the situation. That's not how HOAs work, emergency or not. They can fine you for violations of appearance standards or noise complaints, stuff like that, but they can't just requisition your stuff. So what do I do? Ignore her. Keep your generator. If she tries to actually enforce any fines, fight it. No judge is going to side with an HOA trying to steal personal property during a hurricane. I felt better after hanging up, but I also knew Brenda. She was like a dog with a bone when she thought she was right. Sure enough, 45 minutes later, my doorbell rang. A neighbor's teenager stood there with a formal-looking envelope. Inside was a typed letter on HOA letterhead, citing me for failure to comply with emergency community support measures and threatening daily fines of $500. I crumpled it up and went back to my preparations. The hurricane hit that night around 10 p.m. The winds built gradually, howling around the house like living things. Rain lashed against the windows in sheets. I sat in my living room, watching the weather reports and texting with Emma. The power flickered twice before finally giving out around midnight. I waited 15 minutes to make sure it was not coming back, then went to the garage and fired up the generator. The rumble was loud but reassuring. I had it vented properly. Sitting on a concrete pad I had poured specifically for it, with a transfer switch installed so I could safely feed power into my house circuits. Within minutes, my fridge hummed back to life, lights came on in the kitchen and living room, and most importantly, the air conditioning kicked in. I settled in for a long night. The storm raged outside, but inside I had power, cold water, internet, and even managed to heat up some soup on my electric stove. Around 2 in the morning, I saw flashlights bobbing in the darkness outside. Then someone pounded on my door. I opened it to find Brenda standing there in a rain poncho, soaked despite the covering, with 2 other HOA board members behind her, Margaret and Susan. "Your generator," Brenda shouted over the wind. "We need it now. The community center has 12 people and we have no power." "The answer is still no," I yelled back. "You should have had those people evacuate. Don't be ridiculous. Give us the generator." "It's bolted down and hardwired to my house," I said, which was partially true. The transfer switch made it complicated to move. Even if I wanted to, it would take hours to disconnect everything. Brenda's face twisted with fury. "You're going to regret this, Xavier. When this storm is over, the HOA is going to make your life hell." I shut the door and went back inside. Through the window, I watched them trudge back through the storm. Part of me felt guilty. There were people at that community center, but the rational part of my brain reminded me that I had no obligation to give up my property, and that Brenda's poor planning was not my emergency. The hurricane lasted until dawn. By morning, the winds had died down to tropical storm force, and by noon, Delilah had moved on, leaving behind a neighborhood that looked like it had been through a war. Trees down everywhere, shingles ripped off roofs, fences flattened, and debris scattered across every yard. My house had made it through relatively unscathed, just some missing roof tiles and a broken gutter. I ventured outside to assess the damage. The whole neighborhood was out, everyone checking on each other, starting the cleanup. The power was still out, and the utility company was saying it could be a week or more before restoration in our area. My generator hummed along, the only sound of mechanical life in the silent neighborhood. Around mid-morning, Brenda appeared again. This time she looked haggard, clearly had not slept, but her eyes had a determined glint that spelled trouble. "Xavier, I need to talk to you." I set down the branch I had been dragging. "What is it, Brenda?" "The community center still has no power. We have food in the refrigerators that's going bad. We have people who need their medications kept cold. I'm asking you, please, as a neighbor, help us out." Something in her tone was different, less demanding, more pleading. I sighed. "Brenda, I told you, the generator is hardwired to my house." "What if we paid you?" she asked. "A rental fee. We could pay you to use it at the community center." I paused. This was interesting. What kind of rental fee are we talking about? What would be fair? I thought about it. The generator cost about $12 an hour in gas to run at full capacity. Wear and tear, maintenance, the hassle of moving it and setting it up. $300 a day, I said. Brenda's jaw dropped. $300 a day, that's outrageous. That's my price. It's my equipment, my gas, my maintenance. Take it or leave it, she sputtered. That's price gouging. That's illegal during a state of emergency. Price gouging applies to necessary goods and services being sold at grossly inflated prices. This is rental equipment that you don't need, you want. Big difference. Besides, you threatened to fine me $500 a day for not giving it to you for free. $300 seems reasonable by comparison. Brenda's face went through several shades of red. This is extortion. No, this is business. You want to use my property, you pay for it. Otherwise, I'm using it myself. She turned and stomped away, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. She would be back. Sure enough, 3 hours later she returned with a check for $600. 2 days, she said tersely. That's all the HOA can afford right now. I looked at the check. It was drawn on the HOA account, signed by Brenda and countersigned by the treasurer, Margaret. Legitimate. Okay, but I need a rental agreement in writing, specifying terms, liability, everything. Fine, I'll draft one. We spent the next hour hammering out an agreement. The HOA would rent my generator for 2 days at $300 per day. They would supply their own gas. They were responsible for any damage. They would provide adequate security for the equipment. And most importantly, I could terminate the agreement and reclaim the generator at any time if I needed it for my own purposes. Brenda signed it with a pen that practically tore through the paper. Then came the fun part, actually moving the generator. I had not lied when I said it was complicated to disconnect. I had to shut it down, disconnect the transfer switch, unbolt it from the pad and load it into my truck. It took me 2 hours with help from a couple of neighbors. I drove it over to the community center, a quarter-mile away. The building was a single-story structure used for HOA meetings and neighborhood events. Inside, I found about a dozen people camped out with sleeping bags and coolers. The mood was tense, hot, and uncomfortable. I set up the generator outside, properly vented, and ran extension cords inside through a window. I was not about to try connecting it to the building's electrical system. That was liability I did not need. The extension cords could handle the refrigerator and some lights, which was what they really needed anyway. When the generator roared to life and the lights came on, there were actually cheers. I felt a little bit like a hero, even though I was getting paid for this. Brenda watched me with a sour expression but did not say anything. "Remember, you need to keep it fueled," I told her. It'll run about 8 hours on a full tank at this load. You've got my number if there are any problems." She nodded curtly. I went home, cashed her check through my bank's mobile app, and felt pretty good about the whole situation. I had helped out the community center folks while also not being a doormat for Brenda's demands. Fair was fair. The next morning, Emma called. "The roads are clear enough. We're going to try to come home today. Are you okay?" "Yeah, fine. House is good. Got a funny story to tell you about Brenda and the HOA, though." "Oh no, what did she do now?" I filled her in on the whole generator saga. Emma laughed. "You charged her $300 a day." "Xavier, that's hilarious. She must have been furious." "Oh, she was. But she paid it." Emma and the kids made it home that afternoon. The house was still running on the generator, still no word from the power company on restoration. I was going through gas fast, about 30 gallons a day, but I had stocked up and could get more at the few stations that were open. That evening, Brenda showed up again. This time she looked even worse, stressed and frazzled. "I need to extend the rental," she said without preamble. "Okay." "Another 2 days. The power company says it could be a week," I whistled. "That's going to get expensive for the HOA. How much?" she asked through gritted teeth. "Well, $300 a day for 7 days would be $2,100. Tell you what, I'll do a weekly rate. $2,000 even." Brenda looked like she wanted to argue, but she also looked desperate. "Fine, but the HOA board needs to vote on it. Can I give you an answer tomorrow?" "Sure, but if the answer is no, I'm taking my generator back tomorrow afternoon." She left, and I felt a small twinge of guilt. Was I being too harsh? But then I remembered her trying to just take my generator, threatening me with fines, and the guilt evaporated. She had created this situation, not me. The next morning, my phone rang at 7 a.m. It was Margaret, the HOA treasurer. "Xavier, I need to talk to you about this generator rental situation." "Okay, what about it?" "The board met last night. We want to extend the rental, but Brenda is insisting we also pursue fines against you for non-compliance with the emergency protocols." I sat up in bed. "You're kidding." "I'm not. She wants to fine you $500 a day retroactively from when she first asked for the generator. She's calculating it as 4 days so far, so $2,000. That's insane. She can't do that. Technically, according to our bylaws, she can issue fines for violations. Whether they'll hold up is another matter." "So what happens now?" Margaret sighed. "The board is divided. Susan and I think this is ridiculous and legally problematic. Brenda and Tom think we need to enforce community cooperation. It's 2 against 2, deadlocked. So where does that leave the generator rental? That's why I'm calling. Susan and I want to continue renting. We think it's the best solution. But if we pay you the $2,000 for the week and Brenda successfully fines you $2,000, the HOA is basically getting the generator for free and you're breaking even at best." I thought about this. What if I just take the generator back? Then there's nothing to fight about. Then 12 people at the community center have no power, food spoils, and honestly, Xavier, a couple of them are elderly and in the heat without AC. I'm worried about their health. That got me. I was angry at Brenda, but I did not want anyone to suffer. "Okay, here's what we'll do. I'll continue the rental at the weekly rate. But if the HOA tries to fine me, I'm terminating the agreement immediately, taking the generator back, and I'll see you guys in court over the fines. Your choice." Margaret was quiet for a moment. "Let me talk to the board. I'll call you back." 2 hours later, she called back. "We have an agreement. The board has voted 3-1 to continue the rental and to table the fine discussion until after the emergency is over. Tom sided with Susan and me. Brenda voted no. So I'm clear, no fines. For now. Brenda is not happy, but she's outvoted. I agreed to the terms, and Margaret brought over a check for $2,000 that afternoon. I deposited it and felt like I had won something, though I was not sure what. Emma thought the whole thing was getting ridiculous. "This is so typical Brenda," she said that evening as we sat in our air-conditioned living room, generator humming outside. "She can't stand that you wouldn't just cave to her demands. I just don't understand why she's so obsessed with this. I'm helping the community center. I'm just getting paid for it. Because you stood up to her. Brenda's whole identity is wrapped up in being HOA president and having people do what she says. You challenged her authority." Emma was probably right. Over the next few days, I checked on the generator regularly, making sure it was running properly and that the community center folks had what they needed. Most of them were grateful, thanking me for providing the power. A few asked about the rental arrangement and seemed surprised when I told them the HOA was paying me. "Brenda told us you donated it," one older woman said. Of course she did. I clarified the situation and word spread. I started getting mixed reactions. Some people thought I was smart for charging the HOA. Others thought I was greedy for not just donating the use. The neighborhood was developing camps. Team Xavier and Team Brenda. On day 5 of the power outage, the first houses started getting electricity back. The utility company was working section by section. My street was not in the first wave, but the community center was. At 4 in the afternoon, their power came back on. I got a call from Brenda. "We don't need the generator anymore. Come get it." "Okay, I'll be over in an hour." And Xavier. "Don't expect the full week's rental. You said $2,000 for a week. It's only been 5 days. Brenda, we agreed on a weekly rate. That's the rate for up to a week." "That's not fair. I want a prorated refund." I took a deep breath. "The agreement says weekly rate." "It doesn't say anything about prorating. You paid for a week. You got 5 days. That's how rentals work. I'm going to fight this." "Feel free. The agreement is in writing and signed by you." I drove over and loaded my generator back into my truck. It was dirty and had clearly been run hard, but it seemed okay. As I was loading it, one of the community center residents, an elderly man named Harold, came out. "Thank you for the generator, young man. It made a big difference." "You're welcome, Harold. Stay safe." "You know, Brenda's been talking about you inside, saying some not very nice things." "Yeah, well, Brenda and I don't see eye to eye," Harold chuckled. "She's mad because you didn't roll over like everyone else does. Good for you." I got the generator home and checked it thoroughly. Everything seemed fine, just needed a good cleaning and an oil change. My own power came back on the next day, 6 days after the hurricane. Life started returning to normal. Trees were getting cleared, repairs were being made, and the neighborhood slowly recovered. 2 weeks after the hurricane, I got a certified letter from the HOA. Inside was a formal notice of fine. $500 per day for 4 days of non-compliance with emergency protocols, totaling $2,000. They wanted the $2,000 I had been paid for the rental back, essentially zeroing out the entire transaction. I called Marcus immediately. "They're still trying to fine you, after you rented them the generator and helped them out." He sounded incredulous. "Yep, what do I do? Fight it?" "Request a hearing with the HOA board. You have that right under Florida HOA law. Present your case. If they still find against you, don't pay it. Make them take you to collections or court. No judge is going to side with them." The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, Brenda was busy. I started hearing from neighbors that she was campaigning against me, telling people I had price gouged during an emergency, that I had refused to help the community, that I was a selfish neighbor who only cared about money. The neighborhood chat groups were blowing up with arguments. Some people defended me. Marcus posted the actual facts. I had rented my personal equipment at a fair price after the HOA president tried to commandeer it. Others, particularly Brenda's friends, painted me as a greedy opportunist who exploited a crisis. The thing that bothered me most was that I had not done anything wrong. I had protected my property, charged a reasonable rate for its use, and helped people in the process. But Brenda's narrative was spreading, and reputations are fragile things in a small community. The hearing was held on a Wednesday evening at the community center. The 5-member HOA board sat at a table. Brenda, Margaret, Susan, Tom, and a guy named Rich who rarely said anything. About 30 residents packed into the room. Apparently this was the hot drama of the season. Brenda called the meeting to order and outlined the issue. I had violated HOA emergency protocols by refusing to provide my generator to the community center without compensation, and they were fining me $2,000. Then it was my turn. I stood up with a folder of documents I had prepared. First, I want to address the claim that I refused to help. I didn't refuse. I declined to hand over my personal property for free when the HOA president demanded it in the middle of a hurricane. There's a difference. I pulled out the rental agreement. Instead, we negotiated a rental arrangement. The HOA paid me $2,000 for 5 days of use. I provided the generator, transported it, set it up, and ensured it ran properly. The community center residents had power for lights, refrigeration, and comfort because of this arrangement. Second, regarding the emergency protocols, I pulled out a copy of the HOA bylaws. I've read Section 12, subsection 4, which Brenda cited. It says residents should cooperate and assist during emergencies where reasonable. It does not say the HOA can confiscate personal property. It does not say residents must provide equipment for free. Cooperation is voluntary, not mandatory, and it certainly doesn't override property rights. I looked directly at Brenda. The HOA president tried to take my generator by force, threatened me with fines when I refused, and is now trying to retroactively fine me to recoup the money she agreed to pay me in a signed rental contract. This isn't about emergency protocols. This is about retaliation because I didn't do what she demanded. The room was silent. I could see Margaret and Susan nodding slightly. Tom looked uncomfortable. Brenda's face was bright red. "Xavier, you exploited an emergency for profit," Brenda said coldly. "You charged exorbitant rates. I charged $300 a day for an 8,000-watt generator that costs $12 an hour in fuel to run, plus maintenance and wear. That's actually quite reasonable in the equipment rental industry. You could have rented one from Home Depot for about the same price if they had any available, which they didn't. You had a moral obligation. I had no obligation whatsoever," I cut her off. "Moral or otherwise. I'm not a public utility. I'm a private citizen who owns personal property. You wanted to use that property. I agreed for a fee. That's how transactions work." Rich, the quiet board member, finally spoke up. "Brenda, did Xavier actually violate any specific written rule?" Brenda fumbled with her papers. "The emergency cooperation clause, which says should cooperate not must cooperate," Margaret interjected. "And I'd argue he did cooperate. He provided the generator, just not for free." Susan nodded. "I agree. I don't see a violation here. We made a rental agreement. He fulfilled it. Now we want to fine him for not giving us the equipment for free. That's not how this works." Tom shifted in his seat. "But doesn't it look bad? Charging the HOA during an emergency. Why?" I asked. "The HOA has money. You collected it from all of us through dues. You used those dues to rent equipment that helped residents. That's exactly what HOA money is supposed to be for. If anything, this is the HOA functioning properly." The board deliberated for 20 minutes while we all waited. Finally, they voted. Margaret and Susan voted to dismiss the fine. Rich joined them, saying he saw no clear violation. Tom abstained. Brenda was the only vote to uphold the fine, 3-1 with one abstention. The fine was dismissed. Brenda looked like she wanted to flip the table. This is a mistake. You're setting a precedent that people can ignore community needs. No, Margaret interrupted firmly. We're setting a precedent that the HOA can't just take people's property without compensation. That's the correct precedent. The meeting adjourned. Several neighbors came up to congratulate me or shake my hand. Others left with Brenda, talking in low voices and shooting me dirty looks. The neighborhood was definitely divided. Over the next few weeks, things got petty. Brenda started finding violations everywhere I looked. My grass was a 1/4 inch too tall. My mailbox was faded and needed repainting. My garbage can was visible from the street 15 minutes before the pickup window opened. Each violation came with a $50 fine. I documented everything, took photos with timestamps, and contested every single fine. The HOA board, to their credit, started dismissing most of them. Margaret actually called me to apologize. Brenda's out of control. She's obsessed with this. I'm sorry you're dealing with this harassment. Is there anything we can do to stop it? The board can vote to remove her as president, but that's a big deal and would cause a huge fight. We're hoping she'll calm down. She did not calm down. 2 months after the hurricane, I came home to find a notice posted on my door. The HOA was pursuing legal action against me for creating a hostile environment within the community and seeking to force the sale of my property. That was the final straw. I called Marcus. They want to force you to sell. On what grounds? According to this, I'm creating disharmony and conflict that's disruptive to the community. Marcus laughed, but it was an angry laugh. That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Xavier, they have no case. But you know what? I think it's time we went on offense. How much documentation do you have of Brenda's harassment? All of it. Every fine, every violation notice, every interaction. Perfect. Let me draft a cease and desist letter to her personally and to the HOA board. We'll threaten a harassment lawsuit and a countersuit for abuse of authority. Let's see how she likes playing defense. Marcus sent the letter 3 days later. It was beautiful, legally speaking. It outlined every action Brenda had taken, labeled it as targeted harassment and abuse of HOA authority, and threatened legal action if it continued. It demanded the HOA formally reprimand Brenda and cease all retaliatory actions against me. The response was swift. The HOA board called an emergency meeting, this time without Brenda present. Margaret called me to attend. We need to resolve this before it becomes a legal nightmare for everyone, she said. At the meeting, the board was clearly concerned. Susan spoke first. Xavier, we want to apologize for how this situation has escalated. Brenda's behavior has been inappropriate. The board has voted to issue her a formal reprimand and to require her to cease any further action against you regarding the generator situation. What about her position as president? I asked. Tom cleared his throat. We've discussed that. The board doesn't have the authority to remove her. That would require a vote of the full HOA membership. But we can and have limited her ability to issue fines without full board approval. So she's still president. For now. But her wings are clipped. I agreed to hold off on legal action if the harassment stopped, and for a while it did. Brenda was clearly furious but constrained by the board's decision. She glared at me during neighborhood events but kept her distance. Then, 3 months after the hurricane, the annual HOA elections were announced. Brenda was running for re-election as president. And several neighbors approached me about running against her. "You should do it," Emma said when I told her. "You'd be good at it, and honestly, Brenda needs to go." I was not sure. Running for HOA president sounded like signing up for headaches and endless meetings. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that someone needed to stand up to Brenda's type of governance. The HOA should serve the community, not be a platform for petty tyranny. I announced my candidacy 2 weeks before the election. The neighborhood reaction was immediate and divided. My supporters loved it, seeing it as a stand against Brenda's overreach. Her supporters saw it as a power grab by someone who did not care about community values. The campaign was more intense than I expected. Brenda ran on her experience and record of keeping the neighborhood standards high. I ran on transparency, fairness, and ending harassment disguised as enforcement. We had debates at neighborhood meetings. We sent out campaign emails. It was like running for city council, except stupider, because it was just an HOA. Emma helped me campaign, knocking on doors and talking to neighbors. My kids thought it was funny that their dad was running for neighborhood president. The election was conducted by mail-in ballot over 2 weeks. When the results came in, I had won by a margin of 63 to 47 votes. Not a landslide, but a clear victory. I was the new HOA president. Brenda's face when the results were announced at the neighborhood meeting was something I would never forget. Shock, fury, and disbelief all mixed together. She stood up, said this community has made a terrible mistake, and walked out. The transition was awkward. Brenda was supposed to turn over all HOA documents, accounts, and records to me. She dragged her feet on everything. It took 3 weeks and several threatening emails from Margaret before we finally got everything. When I went through the records, I found something disturbing. The HOA finances were a mess. There were gaps in accounting, unexplained expenses, and several large payments to a consulting company that I could not verify. I called Margaret and Susan immediately. "What is Seaside Management Consulting?" "There are 5 payments to them over the past 2 years, totaling almost $30,000. Margaret went quiet. "I don't know. Brenda handled the finances. What kind of payments?" "They're listed as administrative services and community consulting." "But there's no contract, no invoices, nothing backing them up." Susan joined the call. "Xavier, that's not good. The HOA budget is only about $100,000 a year. $30,000 is a huge amount. I'm going to look into this. If something illegal is going on, we need to know." I started digging. The checks were signed by Brenda as president and countersigned by the treasurer at the time, who had actually been Tom for most of this period. I called him. "Tom, do you remember approving payments to Seaside Management Consulting?" Vaguely." Brenda said it was for management services." "Why?" "Because I can't find any contract or documentation of what they actually did." "Oh, that does seem odd." I did more research. The company name was registered in Florida, and when I looked up the business registration, the owner was listed as Patricia Patterson, Brenda's sister. My stomach dropped. This looked like embezzlement. Brenda had been funneling HOA money to her sister's company for fake services. I called Marcus immediately. "I think Brenda's been embezzling from the HOA." "That's a serious accusation. What evidence do you have?" I explained what I had found. Marcus whistled. "Okay, here's what you need to do. First, don't accuse her of anything publicly yet. Second, get the full board together and present what you found. Third, contact a forensic accountant to do a proper audit. Fourth, if the audit confirms embezzlement, you go to the police." I followed his advice. The emergency board meeting was tense. When I showed them the payments and the connection to Brenda's sister, Margaret's face went pale. "Oh my God, she's been stealing from us." Tom looked sick. "I signed those checks. Am I liable?" You signed them based on false information provided by the president, Marcus, who I had invited as my attorney, assured him. You're not criminally liable, though we'll need to document that you had no knowledge of the fraud. The board voted unanimously to hire a forensic accountant. The audit took 3 weeks and cost $5,000, but it was worth it. The accountant confirmed that $32,000 had been paid to Patricia Patterson's company over 2 years, and there was no evidence any services had been provided. The checks appeared to have been cashed and the money withdrawn. This was textbook embezzlement. We filed a police report. The Jacksonville Beach Police Department took it seriously, assigning a detective who specialized in fraud. Detective Morrison was a no-nonsense woman in her 40s who went through our evidence methodically. "This is pretty clear-cut," she said after reviewing everything. "You have payments, you have the family connection, and you have no documentation of services. We'll need to interview Mrs. Patterson and her sister." 2 weeks later, Brenda was arrested. The actual arrest happened at her house, not publicly, but word spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. People were shocked. Some of Brenda's supporters insisted it was a setup, that I was framing her out of revenge. But most people, once they saw the evidence, were horrified. The criminal case moved forward. Patricia cooperated with investigators, apparently throwing Brenda under the bus. She claimed Brenda had told her the payments were legitimate, and she had just cashed the checks as a favor, giving the money back to Brenda. Whether that was true or if Patricia was minimizing her own involvement, I did not know. Brenda hired a lawyer and fought the charges. The HOA also filed a civil lawsuit to recover the stolen funds. It was a mess that dragged on for months. Meanwhile, I was trying to actually run the HOA properly. We passed new financial oversight rules requiring multiple approvals for any payment over $500. We hired a proper management company to handle the administrative work. We streamlined the fine system to focus on actual problems, not petty violations. The neighborhood slowly healed from the drama. Most residents appreciated the changes and the transparency. A few of Brenda's die-hard supporters never forgave me, but that was fine. You can't please everyone. 8 months after her arrest, Brenda took a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of felony grand theft. The sentence was 3 years of probation, restitution of the full $32,000 plus interest, and 200 hours of community service. She avoided prison, barely. The civil suit was settled as part of the plea. Brenda agreed to sell her house to pay the restitution. She and her husband moved out of the neighborhood 3 months later. I saw them loading a moving truck one Saturday morning. Brenda saw me watching, and for a moment our eyes met. She looked older, defeated. I felt no satisfaction in it, just a kind of sad resolution. Emma squeezed my hand. "It's over." "Yeah, finally." Life in Seaside Oaks went back to normal, or as normal as an HOA neighborhood ever is. There were still disputes about lawn heights and paint colors and where people parked their cars, but it was manageable, reasonable enforcement of reasonable rules. I served 2 years as HOA president before stepping down. Someone else could have the headaches. Looking back on the whole generator saga, it seemed almost absurd how it had escalated. All because I would not give up my personal property during a hurricane and had the audacity to charge for its use. But it taught me something important about standing your ground. Brenda had counted on people rolling over, accepting her authority without question. When I pushed back, even reasonably, it exposed the flaws in how she operated. And ultimately, those flaws went far deeper than just power trips and petty tyranny. They extended into actual criminality. The generator itself was still in my garage, maintained and ready for the next hurricane. Florida being Florida, there would always be a next one. But now when I looked at it, I did not just see 8,000 watts of backup power. I saw the machine that had accidentally uncovered corruption, changed HOA leadership, and taught me that sometimes the right thing to do is simply refuse to be bullied. 1 year after Brenda's arrest, Hurricane Ethan threatened the coast. I prepped my house, tested my generator, and made sure everything was ready. This time, when the new HOA board asked about community resources, we had a proper plan. The HOA had purchased its own generator, a commercial unit specifically for the community center, along with proper contracts for fuel and maintenance. Much better system, I told Margaret, who was still on the board. She laughed. Yeah, learned our lesson. Although I have to say, your rental deal ended up being the cheapest part of that whole mess. The hurricane turned away at the last minute, sparing us, but we were ready. The neighborhood was ready. And the HOA actually functioned like it was supposed to, serving the community rather than one person's ego. My kids asked me once why I had fought so hard over the generator. It was just a machine, Dad. Was it really worth all that trouble? I thought about how to explain it. It was never really about the generator. It was about the principle that someone in authority can't just take your property because they have a title and a clipboard. It was about standing up when someone tries to bully you, even if they're doing it under the cover of community good or emergency protocols. Your property is your property. Your rights are your rights, and if you don't stand up for them, nobody else will. They nodded, though I was not sure they fully understood. Maybe they would when they were older and dealing with their own Brendas, whatever form those took. Emma smiled at me from across the dinner table. You know what the funniest part of all this is? What's that? You actually did help the community. The generator kept those people comfortable and safe. You just made sure you were compensated fairly for it. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's exactly how things should work. She was right. I had provided a valuable service during an emergency. I had negotiated fair compensation. And when someone tried to abuse their authority to punish me for it, I had stood my ground until the system corrected itself. That was not greed or selfishness. That was just being a responsible adult in a community. The story made the rounds in Jacksonville Beach and beyond. I gave an interview to a local news station about HOA overreach and accountability. A few lawyers used the case as an example in seminars about HOA law. And every time hurricane season rolled around, someone would joke about Xavier's generator rental service. I took it in good humor. The whole experience had been frustrating, exhausting, and occasionally infuriating. But it had also been oddly empowering. I had faced down someone who thought their position made them untouchable, and I had won. Not through aggression or retaliation, but through simply asserting my rights and following through when those rights were violated. The generator sat in my garage, a silent monument to that whole crazy chapter of my life. It was just a machine, 8,000 watts of mechanical potential. But it had been the catalyst for exposing corruption, changing leadership, and proving that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply say no to unreasonable demands. I started a small side business after all the drama settled down, renting out equipment for hurricane preparedness. A few generators, some pressure washers, industrial fans. Nothing huge, just a way to help neighbors while making a little extra money. The business did well. Apparently, I had accidentally stumbled into a real need in the community. Brenda's house sold eventually, bought by a nice young couple with a baby. They had no idea about the history when they moved in. I welcomed them to the neighborhood, helped them understand the HOA rules, and made sure they knew they could call me with any questions. They were good neighbors. Sometimes I wondered what Brenda thought about how everything had turned out. Did she regret the embezzlement? Did she regret pushing so hard on the generator issue? Or did she still think she had been in the right and the world had wronged her? I would probably never know, and that was fine. Her chapter in Seaside Oaks was closed. The neighborhood thrived under new leadership. We implemented better communication systems, clearer rules, and fairer enforcement. Dues were spent wisely and transparently. The community center got upgrades. Common areas were improved. It was what an HOA should be, a tool for making the neighborhood better, not a weapon for petty tyrants. I remained active in the community even after stepping down as president, serving on various committees and helping new residents acclimate. The generator incident became part of neighborhood lore, the story that got told at parties and cookouts. Did you hear about the time Xavier charged the HOA for his generator and the president got arrested for embezzlement? It sounded almost too crazy to be true, but it was. Years later, when Hurricane Felicia, the worst storm in a decade, bore down on Jacksonville Beach, the neighborhood was ready. The HOA's generator powered the community center. My generator powered my house. Neighbors helped neighbors. And through it all, there was no drama, no power trips, no demands for property confiscation. Just a community working together the way it should. As I sat in my living room during that storm, listening to the wind howl and watching the rain sheet against the windows, I thought about how far we had come. From Brenda's midnight demands in the middle of Hurricane Delilah to a properly functioning HOA that actually served its residents. It had taken a fight, legal action, and ultimately criminal prosecution. But the system had worked, slowly and imperfectly, but it had worked. The generator hummed outside doing its job, keeping my family comfortable and safe. Just a machine, nothing more. But also a reminder that sometimes standing your ground on a matter of principle, even when it seems small or petty to others, can lead to much bigger changes. You never know what corruption or abuse might be lurking beneath the surface until you refuse to play along with unreasonable demands. Emma came and sat beside me, resting her head on my shoulder. Thinking about the generator again. How did you know? You get this look, reflective, a little bit proud. I laughed. I guess I am proud, not of the drama or the fights, but of not backing down when I was in the right. You should be. You did good. The storm passed. The power came back on. Life continued in Seaside Oaks better than before, stronger than before. And in my garage, maintained and ready, sat the generator that had accidentally saved a neighborhood from more than just a power outage. It had saved us from leadership that put personal power above community service, from financial corruption, and from the idea that authority meant the ability to ignore property rights and basic fairness. Sometimes the smallest acts of resistance lead to the biggest changes. All I had done was refuse to hand over my generator for free during a hurricane. But that single act of saying no had unraveled a web of corruption, changed neighborhood governance, and proved that standing up to bullies, even officially sanctioned ones, was always worth the effort. The generator still sits in my garage today. I test it regularly, change the oil, keep it ready. Because hurricanes will always come, emergencies will always happen, and being prepared is never a waste. But now when I look at it, I do not just see backup power. I see a testament to the principle that your rights matter, your property matters, and no title or position gives anyone the authority to trample either one. And that lesson, more than the generator itself, was worth everything that followed.